Welcome wrestling enthusiasts and curious minds alike to a spine-chilling journey into the heart of darkness with the Most Evil Wrestlers Iceberg. Beyond the dazzling lights and heroic tales, the wrestling world harbors a cohort of performers who have mastered the art of malevolence. Join us as we delve deep into each tier of this sinister iceberg, exposing the calculated manipulations, ruthless tactics, and downright diabolical personas that have left an indelible mark on the history of professional wrestling. Strap in and prepare for a riveting exploration into the most nefarious characters to ever grace the squared circle. This is the Most Evil Wrestlers Iceberg. Disclaimer: this video is for documentary and educational purposes only and does not promote or endorse the actions of the individuals discussed. Viewer discretion is advised. And we're starting off at the tippity top of the iceberg, Tier 6. And where else could we start other than Chris Benoit? Chris Benoit was one of the most technically proficient and respected wrestlers of all time. His illustrious career culminated in a feel-good championship win at WrestleMania 20, but when Benoit no-showed an event in June of 2007, his friends knew something was amiss. By the time police eventually entered the Benoit home, they found the wrestling star, his wife, and 7-year-old son Daniel dead. And it turns out that Chris Benoit was the one behind all of this. All of these heinous things that Chris Benoit did took place over a 3-day period, which means that there was some sort of deliberation, contemplation, and reflection. One spouse taking another spouse's life is one thing, as it sadly happens often, but what he did to his 7-year-old son Daniel was another level of despicable. Even though Benoit had CTE, you cannot deny what he did over that 3-day period was truly evil and wicked. And up next we have Fabulous Moolah. Fabulous Moolah was a legendary and pioneering professional women's wrestler. She gained prominence in the wrestling world during the mid-20th century and became one of the most successful and enduring female wrestlers of her time. Her career spanned several decades, and she held the NWA Women's World Championship for an unprecedented 28 years. Fabulous Moolah basically had a monopoly over women's wrestling. Fabulous Moolah had a wrestling school, but the trainees claimed that Moolah didn't actually train the wrestlers at her wrestling school. According to the women at Moolah's wrestling school, Moolah had other female wrestlers within her camp train the new recruits, and these women did not get paid for their additional work as trainers. It was also claimed that all women at Moolah's wrestling school had to sign a contract that allowed Moolah to function as their booker and receive 25% of their booking fee. The training lasted 6 months and took place up to 5 hours per day inside a wrestling ring inside a barn that lacked heating and air conditioning or fans. The women in her training school had to pay $1,500 per month in order to train at Moolah's wrestling school, and that $1,500 per month in the 1970s would be over $10,000 per month in today's money. Obviously, the trainees couldn't pay this, and they went into debt at Moolah's training camp, creating a ripe environment for abuse. Moolah controlled their lives, and even after they left the wrestling school, despite the trainees resting and taking bookings, they wouldn't make any money because they had to pay off their debt to Moolah. This is not even the worst of it all, as various female wrestlers have come forward with stories accusing Moolah of being a pimp who often provided various wrestling promoters with unsuspecting female wrestlers that will be used as objects. Moolah basically rented out her female trainees in bulk so that the trainers and male wrestlers could fornicate with them. The women sent on these tours were not told of this arrangement ahead of time, and those who refused to fornicate with wrestlers and promoters were then graped. On top of this, the women were often given hard drugs and made into an addict as an intentional attempt by Moolah to gain control of them. Some of the female trainees also had to engage in fornication with Moolah in order to get on her good side. This was very ironic because Moolah would often be homophobic but then engage in lesbianism. All of these allegations managed to soil the reputation and legacy of Fabulous Moolah. And up next we have Alberto Del Rio. Alberto Del Rio is a Mexican professional wrestler who is most known for his time in WWE, where he became a multi-time world champion. In 2016, he made his relationship with WWE superstar Paige public, but these two would go on to become one of the most toxic wrestling couples of all time. Around the time when they got engaged, the two would be involved in a domestic dispute at Orlando International Airport, with a witness claiming that Del Rio roughed up Paige. They eventually called off their engagement, but Paige went on to expose Del Rio for how he was in the relationship. She said that she was often trapped in a room for 6 to 7 hours, getting beat up every couple of minutes. And she tried to fight back, but in the end, it just became a cycle, and eventually she was getting assaulted every single day by Del Rio. A few years after his relationship with Paige, he started dating another woman, but Del Rio was arrested on May 9, 2020 after allegedly battering and SAing his girlfriend. Del Rio was accused of tying down his girlfriend with boxing hand wraps and SAing her for hours. Del Rio's now ex-girlfriend has claimed that he smashed her phone and laptop and had even attempted to burn her passport to keep her from leaving. Del Rio was then indicted on 1 count of aggravated kidnapping and 4 counts of SA by a grand jury in Texas. He was facing life imprisonment, but the charges were dropped about a year later. And up next we have Vince McMahon. Despite being responsible for how popular wrestling is today, Vince McMahon is truly one of the most despicable human beings in the history of professional wrestling. If we went through every single Vince McMahon evil misdeed in depth, this video would be several hours long, but there's a lot. From WWE's first female referee, Rita Chatterton, accusing him of rape in 1986, to him turning a blind eye to rampant SA against children in the WWF during the early 1990s, to him SAing a tanning salon employee in 2006, and him doing the exact same thing in 2011 to a different tanning salon employee, to him pressuring the now deceased Ashley Massaro to keep quiet about her rape during a WWE tour to a US Army base in Kuwait, to it being revealed in 2022 that he paid over $15 million to several different women for SAing them repeatedly over the years, all the way to 2024 with it being revealed that Vince trafficked a former WWE employee named Janelle Grant. The most recent accusation is especially damning because there's a plethora of evidence against him. The kicker in all of this is that this is just the stuff that we know of. Vince has paid so much money in hush money that all of his deviant antics will likely never come to light. All of this has caused Vince to resign from the board of directors at WWE's parent company, TKO, which means that now he essentially has no power in WWE. And now we're moving down the iceberg into Tier 5, with our first entry on Tier 5 being the Dynamite Kid. The Dynamite Kid is one of the greatest wrestlers to ever come out of the UK. He was one half of the most popular tag teams in the 1980s, the British Bulldogs, along with his cousin, Davey Boy Smith. However, behind the scenes, he was very hated by his colleagues. According to various wrestlers, and even his own brother-in-law, Bret the Hitman Hart, the Dynamite Kid was one of the biggest a-holes backstage. He was a big bully and constantly pulled obnoxious pranks on other wrestlers, with one involving him putting sleeping pills in another wrestler's drink and defecating in his bag. The Dynamite Kid constantly got into fights backstage because of his nasty and aggressive attitude. Sooner or later, his life started to fall apart as he got fired from WWE, suffered a bad back injury, and was battling alcoholism. He decided to take his frustration out on his wife and family, making his wife sleep in the closet on several different nights. Another incident involved him beating his pregnant wife up in front of his other 2 children, and then threatening to blow her brains out with his firearm. There was also another incident where he woke up his wife, pointing a firearm straight to her head and telling her that the firearm will be loaded in the future. His constant abuse of his wife even led to her contemplating committing suicide and taking the lives of her children too. The couple eventually split, but the Dynamite Kid's career ended up sad as he looked barely recognizable without the roids. He then got paralyzed in 1996, confining him to a wheelchair until he died in 2018. And up next we have New Jack. New Jack is one of the most controversial wrestlers of all time, most known for diving off high things and his extreme antics in ECW. He might have seemed cool on the outside, but if you really look at what he did over his career, he was quite a scumbag. From him intentionally breaking Chad Austin's leg with repeated steel chair shots in ECW, all because Chad Austin offended him before the match, to him brutally assaulting 17-year-old Eric Koulos, mass transit, by cutting his forehead with a scalpel so deep that he hit a couple of arteries in the young wrestler's forehead, to him legitimately trying to take the life of Vic Grimes for revenge by throwing Grimes off of a 40-foot scaffold. Luckily, Grimes survived his fall. Tim going absolutely bananas on a 69-year-old wrestler named Gypsy Joe by savagely assaulting him with a baseball bat and mercilessly beating him up in a way that crosses the line, all because Gypsy Joe wasn't selling for him. To him trying to take the life of another opponent again by literally pulling out a knife in the middle of the ring and stabbing him 16 times, just because he pissed New Jack off before the match. And if you're wondering, yes, New Jack was high on coke when he did all of these things, which just shows the blatant disregard that he had for his opponent's safety in the ring. And up next we have Bill DeMott. Bill DeMott was a wrestler who is most known for his time in WCW from 1995 to 2001 under the name Hugh Morris, where he was a jobber to the Stars. In 2003, DeMott retired from in-ring competition due to injuries, and then he took up a full-time gig as a trainer for WWE's developmental system. While DeMott contributed to the training of the next generation of WWE superstars, he garnered a reputation as one of the most hated trainers in WWE history, and was accused of various heinous things. Multiple wrestlers accused DeMott of engaging in abusive behavior when he trained them. Some of the stories include a variety of bullying methods that Bill DeMott's trainees endured under his leadership. Bill DeMott was mainly accused of three things. Firstly, berating and insulting the WWE trainees with abusive and offensive language. Some examples include the repeated use of the homophobic term, telling a black wrestler to go back to Africa, and telling a Middle Eastern trainee to go back to building bombs, and much, much more. Secondly, DeMott was accused of intentionally causing or trying to cause injuries amongst the trainees, or making existing injuries much worse through neglect or maliciousness, with one allegation saying that Bill DeMott kicked Ryan Nemeth, then known as Briley Pierce, in his cast when he had a broken leg. Thirdly, the strength and conditioning coach, Matt Wichlinski, was accused of repeated counts of SA, and the trainees reported it to DeMott, but DeMott always covered it up and did nothing about it, because he was his friend. One of the strangest accusations was him making his trainees endure naked stink faces. For those who don't know, a stink face was a move performed by Rikishi where he rubbed his big ass in the face of his opponents. DeMott basically made his trainees do this but naked, which is just insane and completely unnecessary. Bill DeMott publicly dismissed the allegations of misconduct in his training methods, although he felt it was necessary to leave his role as head trainer and he departed from WWE. And up next we have Jimmy Snuka. In the 1980s, Superfly Jimmy Snuka was one of the top babyfaces in the WWF. In 1983, Snuka was dating Nancy Argentino, even though he had a wife. Argentino and Snuka stayed in a motel room when WWF was in Pennsylvania. After the WWF Pennsylvania television taping, when Snuka arrived at his motel, he placed a call for an ambulance for his girlfriend, Nancy. When emergency personnel arrived at his room, she was then transported to the hospital, and there she was pronounced dead. The coroner's report stated that Argentino died of a traumatic brain injury consistent with a moving head striking a stationary object. Autopsy findings show Argentino had more than 24 cuts and bruises all over her body, and the forensic pathologist who performed the autopsy wrote at the time that the case should be investigated as a homicide. It is believed that Snuka delayed 12 to 24 hours in calling for medical help, which contributed greatly to the emergency staffer's inability to resuscitate Nancy. Snuka was the prime suspect in this case. According to the police interviews, Snuka originally told at least 5 people, including the responding officer, that he shoved Argentino, causing her to fall and hit her head. He later told police that he was misunderstood, and Argentino slipped and hit her head when they stopped along the highway to go to the bathroom. In another version, Snuka claims that after he returned from TV tapings, he was surprised to find her sleeping and unresponsive, and that's when he called for help. Just 3 weeks after Nancy's death, the case went cold after prosecutors met with Jimmy Snuka and the World Wrestling Federation's Vince McMahon in the district attorney's office law library. There's no record of what was talked about during this meeting, but in Jimmy Snuka's autobiography, he revealed that Vince McMahon had a briefcase filled with money. He then goes on to say that he doesn't remember if the money was given to the family of Nancy Argentino, but he still reiterated that he did not hurt her. The revelations that he revealed in his autobiography led to police looking into the case again, and in September of 2015, 32 years after the incident, Snuka was arrested and charged with third-degree murder and involuntary manslaughter for Argentino's death. However, the case was dismissed because Snuka was mentally unfit to stand trial, considering that he had dementia and was battling stomach cancer. 2 weeks after the case was dismissed, he died at the age of 73 in Florida. And now we're moving down the iceberg into Tier 4, with our first entry on Tier 4 being Rob Feinstein. Rob Feinstein was the owner of RF Video, which was a video distribution company to ECW. Feinstein was looking to find a wrestling promotion that will allow RF Video to continue selling DVDs and VHS tapes about pro wrestling after the original ECW was bought out by WWE in 2001. Feinstein, as a result, created his own wrestling promotion that would allow him to sell more DVDs, and the company Feinstein made was Ring of Honor. Ring of Honor is an important part of wrestling history as it was home to many wrestlers who have become legends. Ring of Honor would go on to form a wrestling alliance with TNA, and they would band together to produce some of the best wrestling product outside the WWE. However, in early 2004, it was revealed through an internet-based sting operation that Feinstein was a predator. He was looking to obtain lewd favors from someone off the internet who he believed was a 14-year-old boy. In reality, it was an adult posing as a minor. When these shocking turn of events were revealed and publicized by various news sources, this caused a large scandal for Ring of Honor as the founder of the company was revealed to be a nonce. When the news broke, TNA ended their relationship with ROH out of the fear that this negativity could affect their reputation. In the end, Feinstein resigned as the CEO of Ring of Honor in March of 2004. And up next we have Invader 1. Jose Gonzalez, better known as Invader 1, was a Puerto Rican wrestler who wrestled in the United States and around the world, but especially in Puerto Rico. He is most famous for taking the life of Bruiser Brody. Bruiser Brody was a 6'8" bearded mountain of a man who was a legend of his time. Brody was considered as one of the best and brightest stars of the 1980s. He was a name popular across the world, particularly in Japan, and his worldwide fame brought him to Puerto Rico, where he wrestled Invader 1. In this match, Brody worked a little bit too stiff and beat the crap out of Invader 1, essentially burying him in the eyes of his home Puerto Rican fans. While Invader 1 was in the hospital after the Brody match, he was noted as saying that one day he's gonna kill Brody. And in 1988 in Puerto Rico, when Brody was in the locker room before his scheduled match, Invader 1 asked Brody to step into the shower area to discuss business. There was an argument between the two wrestlers and a scuffle ensued. Due to the design of the dressing room, there were no witnesses to what happened in the showers between Bruiser Brody and Invader 1. However, there were 2 screams heard, and they were loud enough for the entire dressing room to hear. Tony Atlas was the first man to enter the scene, and he saw Brody bent over holding his stomach and Invader 1 holding a knife. Due to the heavy traffic outside, it took paramedics nearly an hour to reach Brody. As Brody is such a large man, paramedics were unable to lift him, so Tony Atlas had to physically carry Brody to the ambulance himself. Brody would die later that night from his stab wounds. Invader 1 was charged with murder, but he pleaded self-defense. Back in the 80s, kayfabe was very much alive, so he convinced the jury that Brody's gimmick as a madman was actually how he was in real life. The Puerto Rican jury bought into this, and he was found innocent, thus acquitting him from the murder of Bruiser Brody. What also was very suspicious during this whole ordeal was that Tony Atlas and Dutch Mantel were supposed to be summoned for the trial because they were witnesses of the aftermath, but they only got their invitation to the trial after it had taken place. Invader 1 was able to literally get away with murder. And up next we have Jimmy Savile. Jimmy Savile was a cultural icon on British TV screens for nearly half a century and was even knighted by the royal family. He also was very involved in humanitarianism as he raised millions of pounds for charities across the UK. Little do people know that Jimmy Savile was a former professional wrestler. From the late 1950s to the early 1970s, Savile had over 100 professional wrestling bouts. However, there were allegations of child abuse going back to the early 1960s. Over the years, news sources heard the allegations, but they didn't report on them. At the BBC, where he worked a lot, the truth was reportedly an open secret, with several reportedly having physically seen or been involved with Savile's horrific exploits, but essentially staying silent. Savile died in 2011, but almost a year after his death, many allegations against him started to surface. It was revealed that Savile SA'd kids and adults at 28 hospitals. Savile was effectively allowed free reign of the hospitals, where he committed various disturbing acts against women and children, including accusations of engaging in necrophilia. The age range of his victims were from the age of 5 to 75 years old. The number of victims is thought to be around 450, making him one of the most prolific offenders in British history. Unfortunately, Savile was never brought to justice. There was no trial, prosecution, or prison time. And up next we have Hardbody Harrison. Hardbody Harrison was a wrestler who trained at the WCW power plant and debuted with WCW in 1995. Known chiefly for his physique and strange ring attire, Hardbody Harrison never moved above jobber status. Harrison's contract was not picked up after Vince McMahon and the WWF purchased WCW. He then subsequently retired from professional wrestling. Upon stepping away from the ring, he was a party to a multi-plaintiff lawsuit filed by Sonny Ono on behalf of WCW talent against their former employer AOL Time Warner, charging the conglomerate with racial discrimination. The suit would be settled out of court, for which all the performers got a considerable amount of money. It's been reported that Hardbody Harrison received around $1 million from this payout. However, somewhere along the way, things went wrong for the former WCW wrestler. In 2007, local and federal authorities discovered that Hardbody Harrison had been living with several females in a Georgia home as part of a fornication selling ring, and the 8 women there were being held against their will and were used as sex slaves. Hardbody's victims claimed that they were forced to complete a multitude of tasks and chores in addition to being pimped out to clubs, trailer parks, and parties, and were forced to have sex with up to 8 men at a time. In this case, Hardbody decided to act as his own lawyer, and he contended that the women were willingly living in his home because they wanted to train as professional wrestlers. He said many of them arrived on drugs and he was just trying to help them better their lives. Harrison was unable to convince anyone of his story and was instead sentenced to life imprisonment. And now we're moving down the iceberg into Tier 3, with our first entry on Tier 3 being Steve Gatorwolf. Steve Gatorwolf was a professional wrestler most known for his time in WWE in the late 80s, and he seemed destined for big things. According to Bret Hart, Gatorwolf blew his only shot at the big time after forgetting to do a war dance spot which had been intended to get his Native American character over. Gatorwolf would never get a second chance at the big time and was released from WWE soon after. He got into legal trouble in 2001 when he was sentenced to 2 years in prison for aggravated battery, and over 10 years after he got out, he was arrested in 2014 at the age of 56. He was charged with 7 felony counts of SA against a 15-year-old girl who was the daughter of his friend. He allegedly raped the 15-year-old victim on at least 7 different occasions, dating back to when she was 14. The court documents say that Gatorwolf told the victim that he would commit if she told someone about him because he didn't want to go back to prison. The 15-year-old girl said that she was afraid to report the assault at first because she was scared to, but she eventually did. During his trial, Gatorwolf left threatening voice messages on the girl's phone that were played in court. This is a very serious situation, but Gatorwolf clearly wasn't taking it seriously because he defended himself in court in a third-person promo. Gatorwolf thought he was cutting a promo like he's The Rock or something while facing despicable charges like this. He was found guilty and was sentenced to 16 years in prison. And up next we have DT Porter. Brian McGee, most known by his wrestling name DT Porter, worked on the independents and signed a WWE developmental contract in 2010. His 6'7" build and athletic frame made him a hopeful for the main roster someday. Porter appeared on 2 WWE house shows before ultimately being released in 2012 without being called up. This crushed DT Porter and he spiraled into alcoholism. His life was going off the rails, and in the summer of 2013, Porter was seen by witnesses exiting his car at his girlfriend's apartment complex, and then taking a knife and then stabbing his girlfriend multiple times in the torso and neck, and then fled the scene. He then sadistically posted a picture of her dead body as his Facebook profile picture. A high-speed police chase ensued, resulting in DT Porter crashing his car and being apprehended. DT Porter was then charged with first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. And up next we have Bob Sweetan. Bob Sweetan was a journeyman wrestler who worked for many territories from the central US to the southwest. Sweetan was known for causing riots in arenas for his heel antics, and he was a massive influence for a young Shawn Michaels. Behind the scenes though, he was quite a douchebag. He was a known locker room thief and a notorious bully. Jim Ross has even gone on record saying that Sweetan is one of the worst people, if not the worst, that he's encountered in the wrestling business. Sweetan got involved in a life of drugs in the mid-1980s, and he had been having an affair with a fan who was also a drug dealer. This caused him to completely disappear from the lives of his wife and 4 children. He went missing for months, missing Thanksgiving, Christmas, and birthdays, and much more. He completely abandoned his wrestling career, and all he was doing at this time was doing drugs with his new girlfriend. He eventually was found and his wife divorced him, but in 1990, Sweetan was arrested for charges of SAing a child, and this child was his very own daughter, who was 15 years old at the time of the assault. Sweetan pleaded guilty to the SA of his daughter, but he didn't go to jail as there was a new program that required him to register as a sex offender, stay away from minors, and stay in touch with the authorities. And up next we have James Brown. James Brown was a Scottish professional wrestler who wrestled on the British independent circuit in the 2000s. He competed under the names of James Wallace and Jay Phoenix. During his career, he appeared on the ITV dating show Take Me Out. Even while he was wrestling on the independents, he wasn't very liked. He was a troublemaker, a snitch, a thief, and a backstabber, according to a lot of people that worked with him. However, in the span of just 2 years, he committed 4 lewd crimes involving children. Some of these arrests include being caught with CP and committing a lewd act at a public swimming pool where kids were around. In one of the cases, he approached 4 girls, aged 13 and 14, and made disgusting lewd comments toward them before following them down a street. One of the girls recognized Brown from his appearance on the ITV dating show Take Me Out. The teenagers were left terrified and scared by the incident, and they told their parents about their encounter, so it was reported to the police, who arrested Brown again. For the trauma that he brought to these girls, and considering all of his previous crimes, he was sentenced to 18 months in prison. And when he got out, there would also be a court order preventing him from having any unsupervised contact with children. And now we're moving down the iceberg into Tier 2, with our first entry on Tier 2 being Johnny K9. Johnny K9 was a Canadian professional wrestler who debuted in Stampede Wrestling, and he later defeated Jerry the King Lawler for the AWA heavyweight title. He then went on to wrestle for the WWF, New Japan Pro Wrestling, FMW, and SMW before retiring in the mid-90s. Johnny K9 is more infamous for what he did outside the ring than inside one. He was the president of the Satan's Choice biker gang in Ontario, Canada, and was arrested in the early 90s for trafficking coke and sentenced to 10 months in prison. Right after that, he was arrested again for assault and sentenced to 7 months in prison. He then got released, and after he and several friends were ejected from a strip club for wearing their gang colors, Johnny K9 and his friends decided to get revenge by blowing up the club. Realizing such an event would incur the wrath of local police, they decided it would be more prudent to simply blow up the police station instead. And so Johnny K9 and his friends blew up a police station. What's even more astounding is that he was given bail while awaiting trial for blowing up the police station, and while out, he got arrested for assault, extortion, and carrying a concealed weapon. What a shocker. Inexplicably, he was only sentenced to 33 months in prison, even though an officer got hurt during the bombing and it could have ended very catastrophic. By the time that Johnny K9 got out in 2000, he was already under investigation for being the mastermind behind the 1998 murder of a lawyer and her husband. He was accused of orchestrating their murder from behind bars, but he was fortuitously acquitted. His despicable rap sheet wouldn't end there though, as in 2009, he was arrested with 7 other members of a new gang that he was a part of called the United Nations Gang, and they were charged with conspiracy to commit murder, planning to take the lives of multiple members of a rival gang. This didn't really go anywhere though, but in 2013 he was arrested again for murder, and he was sentenced to 13 years in prison. He only served 3 before being released to live in a halfway house where he died in 2017. And up next we have Pat Patterson, Terry Garvin, and Mel Phillips. The WWE Ringboy scandal refers to a controversy that unfolded in the early 1990s, involving allegations of SA and exploitation of underage boys who worked as ring crew members for the WWE. The scandal first came to light in 1992, when Tom Cole, a former ringboy, filed a lawsuit against Pat Patterson, Terry Garvin, and Mel Phillips, who were all prominent figures in WWE at the time. Cole alleged that he and other boys had been SA'd by these 3 men. As the legal battle unfolded, more ring boys came forward with similar allegations. Pat Patterson, Terry Garvin, and Mel Phillips all had different accusations lobbied toward them. Tom Cole accused Pat Patterson of groping his private areas on numerous occasions when he was only 13 years old, and constantly lick his lips while ogling him. Terry Garvin was very similar to Pat Patterson, but only in a more open way. Terry Garvin SA'd underage ring boys on a regular basis. He used his job to arrange not safe for work rendezvous with the young boys, and one time the then WWF operations manager Nelson Swegler remembers walking into a bus and seeing Garvin doing some unspeakable things to a ring boy. Tom Cole also said that when he was 16 years old, Terry Garvin offered him coke and all kinds of other drugs if he were to fornicate with him, but he refused. It just gets even worse with WWF ring announcer Mel Phillips, who was once allegedly caught by a few wrestlers in 1982 doing some unspeakable things to a 10-year-old in a car. It was reported to a security guard right away who said he'd handle it, but for whatever reason, didn't. Tom Cole also stated that he was SA'd by Phillips when he was 13 years old. Mel Phillips was also accused of videotaping some of the disturbing acts that he committed with these young boys. Mel Phillips also had a system to his abuse. He had a black book in which he had numbers of orphanages and places all over the country where he could call parents up to see if their little boys wanted to set up the ring in WWE. These young boys were always kids from broken homes, and Mel took advantage of them in the most evil way. Mel Phillips was basically running the feeder scheme for little boys for himself, Pat Patterson, and Terry Garvin. It's been reported by other wrestlers that Patterson, Garvin, and Phillips used to refer to the Ring Boys as the Cream Team, which is beyond disturbing. After all of these allegations came to light, Pat Patterson, Mel Phillips, and Terry Garvin were fired from WWE, and the case was settled out of court with Tom Cole. Pat Patterson was the only one of the Predators to get rehired by WWE. And up next we have Andre Hart. Andre Hart was an independent wrestler from the Ohio area, and he went under the aliases Gangsta of Love and Sweet Sexy Sensation. He was building his name on the independent circuit, and then in 2009 he got an offer to be a referee at WWE, but then when they did a medical check on Hart before he was to get hired, they found out that he had HIV, and so they rescinded the contract. He then disappeared for months and then showed back up in Cincinnati and said his contract from WWE was pulled because he had felonies relating to child support. Andre Hart continued as usual, and he wrestled in promotions like World Wrestling Coalition and Unstoppable Wrestling Alliance while he had HIV. Some of his matches were bloody, so he was bleeding on wrestlers even though he knew he was HIV positive. And then on April 13th, 2011, he was arrested by Cincinnati police for fornicating with someone in spite of the fact that he knew he was HIV positive since 2009. The following day, 2 additional women came forth to admit that Andre Davis had also had unprotected fornication with them, and he did not disclose the fact that he had HIV. More women came forward, and prosecutors said that he had unprotected fornication with more than a dozen women. Andre Hart told the judge that he was a fornication addict and that his addiction grew worse when he lost his dream of becoming a professional wrestler after getting his HIV test results. Hart also said that the woman that he had slept with had to bear some responsibility for choosing to engage in unprotected fornication with him. At the time of the trial, none of the women that he had unprotected fornication with or the men he wrestled against tested positive for HIV, but their status is unknown after the trial. Andre Hart got his justice served to him as he was sentenced to 32 years in prison. And now we're moving on to the deepest part of the iceberg, Tier 1. With our first entry on Tier 1 being Grizzly Smith. Grizzly Smith was an American professional wrestler who had an over 20-year career in the wrestling industry and held various backstage positions in promotions such as Mid-South Wrestling, the WWE, and WCW. He was the father of professional wrestlers Jake the Snake Roberts, Rocking Robin, and Sam Houston. His most famous child, Jake the Snake Roberts, was conceived in a very disturbing way. While Grizzly Smith was dating Jake the Snake's grandmother, Grizzly raped the woman's 12-year-old daughter, who became pregnant with Roberts. Grizzly then convinced Jake's grandmother to allow him to marry her 13-year-old daughter, and so he forced the 13-year-old girl, Jake's mom, to marry him. Jake the Snake's childhood was filled with trauma and abuse, as he constantly suffered SA from his stepmother, and Grizzly knew all about it, but did nothing to stop it. Roberts also claims that Grizzly would travel around the country and often sleep with underage girls. Grizzly Smith was a serial nonce, and his noncery didn't stop there, as he began to SA his own girl children. One of his daughters, Rocking Robin, disclosed that she suffered SA by her father from the age of 8 to 14, and she threatened to shoot him with his own gun in order to make him stop. Rockin' Robin believes that her other sister, Jolynn, was also assaulted by Grizzly Smith. The aftermath of these harrowing events resulted in a downward spiral into substance abuse for all of Grizzly Smith's children. Jake's well-documented descent into drug addiction serves as a poignant testament to the profound impact of childhood trauma. And up next we have Douglas Whitton. Douglas Whitton was an independent wrestler from Texas. During his wrestling career, he fell into alcoholism, and in order to try and get better, he moved to New Orleans for a fresh start. However, while there, he fell back into his old alcoholic ways and checked himself into rehab. After signing himself out of the facility, he would be homeless, but he would find work at a church. At this church, he met the Reeves family, which was a family of 4, and they invited him to stay at their house out of the kindness of their hearts, until he got back on his feet. Less than a week after he started staying at the Reeves family home, he brutally took the lives of the family of 4, with the youngest victim being a 9-year-old boy. The murder items were a knife and a blunt object similar to a brick or a rock. Whitton went on the run for a little bit, but it wasn't long before the police caught him. He confessed to the murders, but he pleaded innocent to the charges because he claimed that he had blacked out and couldn't remember taking the lives of 4 innocent people. The judge did not believe his defense, and on February 26, 1999, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. And up next we have Buck Zumhofe. Rock and roll Buck Zumhofe was a staple in 1980s AWA, and he was the second ever AWA light heavyweight champion. In 1986, he was arrested and found guilty of misconduct with a minor. After he was a confirmed predator, he went back to wrestle for AWA. His predatory behavior didn't stop there though, as in 1989, he was sentenced to 36 months in prison after being convicted of 4th degree misconduct with a minor. He spent his time in prison and was ultimately released and went back to wrestling like nothing had happened. Even after the fact that he was a 2-time convicted sex offender, WWE hired him on several different occasions, even wrestling against The Undertaker one time. This is insane, but the 1980s and 90s were a different time. All of this is just scratching the surface though, because his story gets even worse. He was arrested again in 2013 when he was charged with 12 felony counts of criminal misconduct after he SA'd his very own daughter for 12 years between 1999 and 2011. He was convicted on all 12 counts, and after the verdict, he tried to flee from the courthouse, but officers stopped him, and he was additionally charged with trying to escape from custody. He was officially sentenced to 25 years in prison. And up next we have the Lady of Silence. Juana Barraza, known by her wrestling name, La Dama del Silencio, which in English translates to the Lady of Silence, was a Mexican professional wrestler who was most active in the 1980s. The Lady of Silence had a very rough upbringing. She was born in a rural area north of Mexico City. Her mother was an alcoholic who reportedly pimped her out to a man in exchange for 3 beers when she was a minor. Because of this, the Lady of Silence hated her mother. She then got into wrestling, as she worked as a popcorn vendor by day and a luchadora by night. But after she retired from the ring, her true nature came out, as she became a serial killer. Beginning in 2003, the Lady of Silence would gain entrance to the homes of elderly women by pretending to help carry in groceries, or claiming to be sent by the government for medical help. Once inside, she would pick a weapon, like a set of stockings or a telephone cord, and strangle them. Though the crimes didn't seem to be motivated by financial gain, she would often look through her victims' houses for something to take with her, as a sort of memorabilia. Police following the case had their own theory on who the killer was and what was driving the person. According to criminologists, the killer was most likely a man with a confused sexual identity who had been abused as a child by an elderly relative. Eyewitness descriptions of a possible suspect reinforced this idea. According to witnesses, the suspect had a stocky build of a man but wore women's clothing. As a result, the police began rounding up known transvestites for questioning. Obviously, the police were way off, and over the next few years, the Lady of Silence killed almost 50 women before the police finally caught a break in the case. The Lady of Silence took the life of an 82-year-old woman with a stethoscope. After she was leaving the scene, the woman who was renting a room in the victim's home returned and found the body, and she immediately called the police. With the help of the witness, the police were able to arrest the Lady of Silence before she left the area. During questioning, the Lady of Silence confessed to having at least one woman, stating that she committed the crime out of a sense of anger at elderly women in general, and she explained that her hatred was rooted in feelings toward her own mother. With the evidence they collected, police were able to charge the Lady of Silence with 16 different murders, but she is believed to have killed up to 49 people. Though the Lady of Silence continued to claim that she had only been responsible for the one that she got caught for, she was convicted and sentenced to 759 years in prison. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, please check out our other videos, and also please like, share, comment, and subscribe. But anyway, goodbye.